Welcome to Politics on Screen, the impact of Senator Patrick Leahy's 1974 campaign film. My name is Chris Burns. I'm the interim director of the Silver Special Collections Library here at UVM. This event, and there's an accompanying exhibit downstairs on the second floor of Billings, are both about the 1974 campaign for U.S. Senate, which featured Patrick Leahy, Richard Mallory, and an unknown fellow by the name of Bernie Sanders running on the Liberty Union ticket. I highly encourage you to come in another time and take a look at the exhibit. It's a fantastic look at that election. That exhibit and this event are the work of 4 of my talented colleagues in Special Collections who are all with us tonight. Sheer Bach, Erica Dunnis, Sally Blanchard O'Brien, and Prudence Doherty. I want to note that our good friends at CCTV are filming today's event for a later airing, including during the Q&A period at the end of the discussion. Special Collections, as many of you know, is the home to the library's rare book collection, the university archives, and a very large and rich collection of Vermont research materials. A key newer piece of that collection is Senator Patrick Leahy's archives, which arrived at the university in early 2023. The collection spans the senator's 48 years in the Senate. It's roughly 2,800 boxes of paper records and 20 terabytes of electronic records. Significant collection, which when he takes a look at it says, "You poor people." But the senator did help us acquire some funding to work on that collection. Sheer, Sally, and Erica are our 3 super talented archivists who are working on that for a 5-year project. The senator's first campaign took place in 1974, 50 years ago, so a good time to look back. One particular component of that campaign is a 30-minute film that Dorothy Tod made, which is the subject of our event tonight. We're fortunate to have both Dorothy and the senator with us to talk about that film and its impact on the campaign in a conversation that will be moderated by UVM's own Helen Morgan Parmett. So before handing things off to Helen, who will introduce the film, let me tell you a little bit about Helen, Dorothy, and Senator Leahy. Helen is the Edwin W. Lawrence Professor of Forensics, an associate professor in the Department of English and Film and Television Studies. She is also the director of the Speech and Debate Program and the Lawrence Debate Union, as well as affiliate faculty in the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies in Film. Helen's research and teaching centers on critical media studies, where she focuses especially on relationships among media, identity, and place. Her first book, Down in Trem, Race, Place, in New Orleans on Television, considered how post-Katrina television production influenced the city and its neighborhoods. Her second book, which is forthcoming, is titled Stadium City, Media Infrastructure in U.S. Cities. And some of Dr. Parmett's recent research considers television's relationship to the urban-rural dialectic and how media has and continues to shape our sense of Vermont and what it means to be a Vermonter. Dorothy Tod is the filmmaker of Senate 74, Choosing a New Leader for Vermont. An award-winning film editor, producer, and director, Dorothy is well known for her work on children's television programs, as well as compelling documentaries that shed light on timely social and environmental issues. She began her film career at Drew Associates, working with Robert Drew, known in film history as the father of the American cinema verite documentary. She went out to do freelance editing for other cinema verite masters, Richard Leacock, D.A. Penbreaker, and the Maisels brothers. Another freelance gig was editing for a show you may have heard of called Captain Kangaroo. There, she met the people who went on to create Sesame Street. And she is credited, and this is pretty amazing, with creating the Sesame Street opening theme segment, and has produced and edited many short nature films. In Dorothy's bio, I think she says way too many short nature films. Dorothy established Dorothy Tod Films in 1972 and went on to create award-winning films including What If You Couldn't Read, Warriors Women, and A Dyslexic Family Diary. She was also a member of the Producers Committee for Freedom and Unity, the Vermont Movie, a documentary series that portrayed Vermont's iconoclastic spirit. And Todd, in addition to creating the film for Senator Leahy, also created a film for Governor Richard Snelling. Curiously ran against Senator Leahy in 1986. Some backstory there. And of course, Senator Patrick Leahy, a native of Montpelier, served multiple terms as state's attorney, beginning in 1966 before becoming the state's longest-serving U.S. senator and the first Democrat elected to the Senate from Vermont, serving 8 terms ultimately in the U.S. Senate, representing Vermont for 48 years. He served as president pro tem of the Senate twice. He chaired 3 major committees, Appropriations, Judiciary, and Agriculture, and he retired as the 3rd longest-serving senator in the nation's history. Now at the University of Vermont, Senator Leahy serves as a President's Distinguished Fellow. As senator, his list of accomplishments is long. He established the National Organic Food Program. He, as a freshman senator, became the only Vermonter in Congress who voted to end the Vietnam War, a decision that ultimately hinged on a single vote in the Armed Services Committee. He wrote the law banning the export of landmines and led the efforts in Congress to aid mine victims by creating the Leahy War Victims Fund. And he was a champion for human rights and author of the so-called Leahy Law, which banned U.S. aid to foreign military units accused of gross human rights violations. These are just a few highlights from his long list of highlights over his career. But I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Helen to introduce our film.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Chris, and to Special Collections, especially Prudence Doherty and Eric Adonis, who invited me and helped me sort of prepare for today. Obviously, thank you to Senator Leahy and Dorothy Tod for being here and for this amazing historical artifact that you've created, and for the audience for joining us today. So it's in the context in which the state of Vermont was the first one called for the Democratic presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, and in which there was basically no question that that was going to be the case, it seems hard to believe that Patrick Leahy was ever considered a long shot for Vermont senator. Yet that's what he was. Going into the 1974 campaign, Vermont had never sent a Democrat to the Senate. Although there are likely several factors that contributed to Senator Leahy's success in that election, including the so-called hippie influx into Vermont in the late 1960s and early 1970s, along with the changing demographics and political landscape of Vermont and the nation at the time, the senator's astute and strategic use of media is undoubtedly a core factor. According to my colleague, Philip Baruth, an English professor at the University of Vermont and the Democratic Senator pro tem, the film we'll view tonight constitutes a, quote, nuclear device in electoral terms. He went from being an almost certain loser to eking out a 4,000 vote margin on the strength of that technology. The film ran in 30-minute blocks before Jeopardy, with polling suggesting that this strategy contributed to a 10-plus point shift in the future senator's favor. While many look at the historical legacy of Bernie Sanders' unexpected 1981 election to becoming Burlington's first socialist mayor as marking the turning point in Vermont's political landscape, I think it's perhaps Senator Leahy's 1974 Senate election and the campaign film that we're going to film shortly that's perhaps the real precursor to these later shifts. Now, notably, television was still a relatively new and highly contested medium for political campaigning in 1974. Political campaigns had historically relied on print media to introduce themselves and convince voters. And while Franklin D. Roosevelt took advantage of film for his campaigns, film lacked the kind of immediacy, intimacy, and liveness necessary to be an effective campaign vehicle. So it was broadcasting, first in radio and later in television, where candidates first began to see a real possibility of spreading their message and connecting with voters through political advertising. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower pioneered a series of television campaign spot advertisements, the most famous of which is the I Like Ike spot, which was produced by the Walt Disney Company with the aim of softening the military figure's image with the American people. Between 1948 and 1972, campaign spending rose at an annual compound rate of 10%, with many scholars attributing this drastic rise to spending on radio and TV advertising, producing a so-called arms race in political campaign spending. According to a 1973 study done by the Roper Organization, in 1972, 2/3 of American people said that television was the best way to follow candidates for national office, and more than half got their clearest understanding of the candidates and issues in national elections from television. Prior to the 1970s, political researchers and many politicians, especially those not running for national office, viewed TV as fairly inconsequential to voter turnouts and results, viewing TV as just another source of information and not one that was particularly valuable. However, the political unrest of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and the core role of television in bringing those events to the American people, helped to demonstrate the power of television and its hold on the American public. Americans saw the horrors of the Vietnam War close up on their living room TVs and bore witness to civil rights protests and student activism. While scholars debate the extent to which TV affected how Americans thought and felt about these events, there's no doubt that TV had ensconced itself as a core part of American culture, as a site in which struggles over who and what it meant to be an American played out in the daily and evening programs on our screens. Television has been both hailed and denounced as a tool for political campaigning, not unlike social media in our contemporary times. For some, TV was a democratizing medium, enabling more information to reach more voters and opening up the political sphere to non-elites. For others, television was merely a commercialized, superficial medium that would put us on the path to demagoguery, a real threat to democracy. These anxieties and tensions were played out during the 1960 presidential election, and especially in the televised debate between the Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy and Republican Richard Nixon. Whereas those listening on radio thought Nixon won, TV viewers thought Kennedy won. The results have led to endless debates amongst academics and scholars and regular people about the political value or damage of television. Did these results demonstrate that TV viewers makes viewers focus less on facts and more on images, or did they show how television could engage viewers in the facts more thoroughly or in new ways? So it's this broader context that Dorothy Tod's groundbreaking campaign documentary of Patrick Leahy's 1974 bid emerges. In today's 30-second soundbite culture, this 30-minute documentary immediately stands out. The film is notable as well as for the way in which it presented Vermont and Vermonters to Vermonters. Television and broadcasting more generally were imagined and constructed through federal regulation as national mediums, with the aim to bridge and bring together a dispersed set of localized publics amidst shifting patterns of immigration and demographics into a coherent ideal and sense of the nation. Local television was devalued, often constructed as backward and provincial, a problem to be overcome by connecting local outlets to national networks. As a result, Vermonters rarely saw themselves or their concerns on their TV screens. The campaign video is therefore significant not only in the context of the history of political campaigning on television, but also for Vermont's media and televisual history. Part of why it was likely so successful is that it capitalized on the aura of television, that feeling that what was on TV was important, special, that it mattered, and characterized Vermont and Vermonters as worthy of televisual representation. And it did so by tapping into a long-running discourse of Vermont as unique and special. Throughout the documentary, you'll hear Senator Leahy discussing the unique nature of Vermont, identifying the Vermont character as one that is moral, refusing double standards, independent, rugged, with a strong backbone. These characteristics, too, are positioned as suggestive of Vermont's potential to serve as a national leader, where its small-town politics are reimagined as an asset rather than a liability. Yet the video also draws on a discourse of potential threats to this fragile and unique character of Vermont. It's in danger of being lost, and this should sound familiar since it's a campaign refrain used by many political candidates in Vermont today. The rhetorical challenge that the documentary had to overcome was in presenting Patrick Leahy and his politics as an essential part of this unique character in Vermont, since his youth, religion, and political party seemed to set him apart. Staking claim to his multi-generational roots in Vermont, from growing up near the state capital in Montpelier, living on the land of his family farm, to his grandfather's stone-cutting prowess, the documentary represents him as an embodiment of vital Vermont characteristics, as an honest, hardworking, and conscientious family man. The documentary builds identification with its viewers not only through its representation of Senator Leahy, but also through its representation of the diverse cultural geography of Vermont, through on-location filming that shows Vermont's pastoral, agricultural landscape replete with rolling hills and dirt roads, to the vibrant urban center of Burlington, full of shops, cars, and bustling people with resplendent views of the waterfront. There's an effort to situate the future senator as enmeshed with all Vermont, not just Chittenden County or Montpelier, but with the landscape as a whole, as he stresses how many miles he's traveled and his commitment to representing all Vermonters. Most of the documentary shows Leahy speaking with his constituents, who also represent core archetypes of Vermont and its diverse landscapes. Farmers, the country doctor, French Canadians, the working man pumping gas, as well as UVM students representing the future. What makes the documentary so effective, however, for me, is that it not only represents Senator Leahy as a Vermonter and its well-worn and trodden iconographies, but also intervenes into that representation, drawing from these histories to constitute a future vision of Vermont and Vermonters as well, as a place and public body who are invested in lower and middle-income people, who stand against special interests like big oil companies and instead protect Vermont culture, from agriculture to stone cutting to the ski industry. It articulates the unique qualities of Vermont's integrity, independence, and ruggedness to a new future, one that prioritizes rail travel, which I really wish would have gotten passed over here, over cars, preventative rather than punitive treatment for drug users, and it calls viewers to recognize that the inherent values of Vermont necessarily make them a people who believe in the necessity and benefit of social services, as integrally articulated to the historical ideals of Vermonters. Ultimately, the documentary both draws from and constitutes a new ideal of Vermont and Vermonters, and it is this constitutive ideal that Senator Leahy has left as a legacy to our great state. The Silver Collections at the University of Vermont is so incredibly lucky to be able to house this documentary along with the 2,800 boxes of additional archival materials taken during your tenure. It represents an important piece of Vermont history from which we can learn much about Vermont and who Vermonters were, but also about who we are, as well as who we're becoming. So thanks so much for this opportunity to get to talk to you a little bit about the documentary. And now I think we're ready to play. And so you get to see it. Well, thank you so much for that, for making that video and for coming and joining us for this talk. I have some prepared questions, but before we get to them, I just wanted to get a sense of what was it like to sit here and watch this together. I loved that I sat behind you and Marcel and got to kind of see you, talking to each other. So maybe you could just give your reactions to watching this video these years later.
Well, it's interesting because you're going back 50 years and seeing parents and siblings and everything else. I did talk over one thing when I said our children are going to live their lives in the next century, and most of their lives in the next century. They heard that so often the way I was there, and I said, and our children, they pipe up in unison, we're going to live our lives in life. And it brought back wonderful memories. I saw what a great job Dorothy did. But people don't realize had a very, very limited amount of time to do that. Nobody had ever done a 30-minute ad like this. And nobody thought it would have any effect. The next day, just walking down the street, Marcel and I, when are you going to show that again? We loved it. And it brought back, it showed Vermont, people. You should have washed the windows on the car, of course, but Dorothy made it as natural as it could be, and it was us. So, yeah, it's kind of fun. We were watching each other. Remember that?
What was it like for you to watch it?
Well, I could see all the problems with making 16 millimeter film. You call it a video. It's not a video. It's film.
Film, yeah.
And you had like a countdown with a beat, and that means you have picture running here, you have audio running here, you have to sync it up. So that means you have to send the film out to a lab and get it developed. You have to get the audio that was in the tape recorder out to another place where it comes back in 16 millimeter brown things with sprockets that have to then get sunk up. Then you have to get that message. Then you have to get these two coded, and that goes to a different place so that you can have them in sync and edit and have these pieces coming and going. So it's a lot of, the word video is just like magic because you put it in the camera and then you just run it. And there's so much to this, and there's so much expense involved in just the mechanics of buying the film and getting it developed and getting it sunk up and getting it coded. And then you begin to edit. So we had maybe 3 weeks or something like that, some terrible type thing. And there's, I don't really get credit for the design of this film. Joe Rothstein and Dave Schaefer got the credit for the design of this film. Joe Rothstein had a crew neck sweater on. He was talking to the drug doctor as a cutaway, and he was a consultant from Washington who was, and you probably can answer this better. He knew how to position democratic issues in a national sense for somebody who's running locally. And Joe was pretty smart and fun to be around. And Dave Schaefer was the guy who was walking along the beach, and he's the narrator of the film, and he worked at IBM. And somebody over there recognized Dave Schaefer. He was a character in town, a sailor. I mean, Dave Schaefer was definitely a man about town. And he was a lot of fun to work with. He was a reporter at the Free Press, I think, right before that or whatever. Anyway, he and Joe chose who we talked to. They knew the overall bunch of characters that need to have a voice for this project. Would you want to hit this back, Patrick?
Yeah, do you want to add to that, or?
No.
And also, could you maybe tell us?
More questions.
Yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit. Or do you want to? You have something that you wanted to add? Yeah.
Okay, that's just one part of it. I'm not going to take credit for the shape of the film, other than all the terrible titles that didn't happen right, and they're all too light. And we had no time to get an interprint and then get these 7 prints out to the stations and air. I mean, it was literally no time frame at all for all of it. So I'm not very proud of some of the especially the titles. And the editing was fun to do. I mean, I was working out of my house and just fast, and it was. I'll say this: it's much more fun to work on an initial campaign than a re-election, because everybody's so fired up, and so there's a real do or die aspect to it. And then when you have to do a re-election, there's just so much at stake, and everybody's upset. So
Yeah.
I might add to that. We were breaking ground with this. Nobody ever did a half-hour movie. They thought, well, in fact, our opponent, we had agreed on how much we would spend on TV ads and kept to it. It was about the only opponent I ever had that actually agreed to it and kept his word. And we kept to it, but never thought that we'd pass up a bunch of 30-second ads to have this half hour. It was really, at that time, taking a leap. You mentioned earlier.
Wasn't it less expensive to do 30 minutes than
Yes,
ads?
rather than doing 30 minutes or 30-second ads, doing 30 minutes altogether was less than the accumulation. So we could do it. And you talked about the Nixon and Kennedy,
Yeah.
I was hitchhiking back to St. Mike's from Montpelier the night of that debate, and the person who picked me up had on his car radio, and he was a Kennedy supporter. We both agreed, God, Kennedy lost that. And then walking the door, everybody's cheering. Boy, did he do a great job! And we watched the 11 o'clock news, and I said, he won. Well, this, in some ways, the same thing. Marcel and I had so many people come up to us on the street and said, we saw your movie, not your campaign ad, we saw your movie. And, oh, your children are beautiful. I know your parents. The doctor who's on there is very well-known Republican in Montpelier. He said, we didn't script it. He just said, I delivered him, and he was a good boy, and a good boy growing up. And
What was the doctor?
Dr. McIntyre, George McIntyre, had license plate 449, as I recall. But he was just a very big house calls and all that.
So it sounds like one of the reasons why you made the campaign video was because it was cheaper than running the 30-second ads. But did you see television as a core part of your campaigning strategy, or did somebody have to convince you that TV was really where you wanted to put your efforts?
Well, I never run a real campaign like that. The state's attorney didn't have to very much of a campaign. And TV was something pretty new to me. Dorothy and others convinced me the half hour. And we were out, Marcel and I were out campaigning. We'd be driving back sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning, trying to stay awake, the windows all down, the radio on focus, trying to stay awake, so we didn't see many ads. And Dorothy and others said, we can do a half hour. And I said, how the heck do you make a half hour interest of somebody who's a state's attorney? And it worked out.
Or do you want to add something? And can you tell us a little bit about the video, like how you put the video together as well?
I'd like to say a little bit about television. It has an informalness, and politicians like you to record them making a speech, and they're really insulted when you say, I don't want to film your speech. I want to film talking to you in a car. And so this idea of having a prop, whether it was Dave Schaefer walking along the beach, or whether it was Marcel at the senior center, or whether it's you as a senator with a camera, or driving in a car. And that seemed to be a more intimate way of getting at what your message was. And I think that my background is assuming that they're a K person. I just wasn't going to film a press conference. And that was a given, and that was very insulting, I know. When I went to go to Snelling, he was really insulted by that. And he wanted me to do that because I had gotten such a success with Patrick's campaign, and that became a new concept. Anyway, having the informalness, I'd say, was something that and the ability to do that. And I knew Adam Gifford. He was mostly a New York cameraman, but he had a place in Chelsea, and he's good at mobile, getting going, and that we both had. I think Adam was in the front seat of the car with Patrick. I was in the back taking sound. So you don't have much tripod or assistance or other people kind of helping you. What?
He must have had it really smart.
Yeah, I think
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that's, I'd say that was one of the criteria from my point of view, is it had to be intimate or forget it.
Yeah. So a lot of the video is really you talking about Vermont and its uniqueness and its specialness. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your aims were with sort of articulating yourself to Vermont and what it meant, and how that still maybe resonates today?
Well, maternal grandparents immigrated to Vermont from Italy. And my mother was born in Vermont. The family all spoke Italian. I had to very little Italian, talking to my grandparents. My maternal grandparents I never knew. My grandfather was a stone carver, and he died in his early 30s. We do joke about the fact that in the Berry Cemetery, there's a tombstone that says Patrick J. Leahy, and my opponent's going to drive by, darn, wrong one. But I was proud of my Vermont roots, and I hope that it shows. Unlike many senators I've served, we never left Washington. We were moved out and sold the house within a few weeks. We had done it, moved back here to Vermont. We both wanted to be in Vermont, and I wanted to show I cared about Vermont. I've seen so many people run for office, and they've got their talking points, and they're not real. And I knew in running I was okay in Chittenden County because being a state attorney here for years, but I had to go to other parts of the state where it wasn't that well known. It happened up in the Northeast Kingdom with heavily French Canadian. Marcel and her father would campaign there. They hear a bit of a French accent, they switch into French. And they were, as I told it, they'd say, well, you know, that guy Leahy there, he's not that smart, but his wife's one of us, and he probably needs a job. Let's go for it. And, but the thing is, we tried to get all around. See, I think people saw that we were Vermonters and had Vermont values. I don't think there's anything that's artificial as somebody comes to the state and tries to pretend they know the state. And the state goes across the political spectrum, as you know, it goes across the economic spectrum. But there's a certain core aspect of a real Vermonter, and that we want to demonstrate here. I didn't want to do fancy talking points. I wanted to let people know as a Vermonter. I did have myself tell me I could not tell stories with a Vermont accent, but you let me tell you, Mr. Man.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, from the filming perspective, how you wanted to represent Vermont through the production practices that you used in making the film.
I must say my favorite shot is the end one coming up, the workers coming out of the quarry. The workers coming out of the quarry.
Oh, God.
And, you know, having that kind of anchoring the end of the film to me, every time I see it, oh my God. And yeah, it's funny because Hannah Dennison had a whole dance piece in that quarry, and I was there last summer, or the summer before, sitting there thinking about the quarry, and all I kept doing is coming back to this shot in the film, and that's aside the point, but it does feel the utter earthiness of Vermont. And there's a brief shot, I think I filmed it up downtown Warren, which looks totally different right now. And I was picking, I filmed a little, some waterfalls and different things for that felt important to me to add to the thing that wasn't just straight political things, but it did give a feel for Vermont, at least as I was experiencing it. And I was pretty new to Vermont, so I can't say that I was one of the probably on the hippie end coming in, and pretty ignorant about politics, and therefore I would not have been at all conversant to put this piece together from my knowledge. That's Dave Schaefer and Joe Rothstein. But I could edit something that made sense to me. So that's what I can take credit for on that one. But the ethic that comes through is something I have had to live with, the specialness of Vermont. And it's been angering mentality, having this as a definition of how to live it. As some, I've been living in Vermont now since 1970, and I'm in the same house I was in when I did this film, and I have a garden that I still do, and I kayak on the lake, and I feel that the place is real for me and has been, and it's important for me to represent it in the ways that I have through films. And I'd say that doing this particular film was the seed for how I perceive the other things I've done in Vermont, and I'm grateful for that chance to be educated.
Of course, one of the people who did the Vermont thing the best was Fred Tuttle, ran for and
This is very different, but it is reminiscent.
oh, well, he was a nominee, and I was a Democratic nominee, but he was unexpectedly, he had an opponent who had tenuous ties to Vermont, but brilliant, multi-gazillionaire, and he came up, he was going to spend whatever it took. And Fred said, well, I'm going to spend, how many times we have? 254. I'm going to spend $254, $1 per table. And then when they did debate, I mean, this guy from Massachusetts probably new to everything, and Fred hands him a list of towns. He said, how do you pronounce them? Well, it's not Leicester, it's Leicester. It's not Calais, it's Calais. It's not Charlotte, it's Charlotte, and so on. And Fred says, well, you got one of them right. Michigan, Illinois, and those are really nice towns. While you're in Vermont, you want to take the time to go by and see it, and I'll miss you. Maybe apologize to people. Well, we were, as we're getting closer to the primary, both of us said, Fred's going to win. And we knew it when we were at a parade in Northwood just before the primary. And the guy from Massachusetts comes by, he's got people carrying flags on him in similar outfits and talent and everything, and just strutting. Dead silence from the crowd. Now, most parades in Vermont, you can have the local septic system company go by, they're going to get applause. Nothing. Fred, they drive him up in a Model T, and people are screaming, Fred! And clapping. He spots us, he says, come here. He said, now, don't worry. He said, I said, no, Fred, I think you're going to win the primary. Well, I ain't going to hurt you. Dottie and I are going to vote for you. And that was what happened. That was one of the easier campaigns. But the point is, his opponent spent a fortune, and he lost badly. And people said, Fred may not be serious as a Senate candidate, but he is a Vermonter. And he came across as a Vermonter. And that made all the difference.
So I think that we want to have some time for our audience questions, and it might be a good time for that. And so if you want to ask a question, I can walk around, and then I'll bring the microphone back.
I wanted to ask about the script. About the script. Who wrote the script? Your campaign crew?
No,
I'd say Dave Baker.
yeah, but the most of the question and answer time they really asked me questions, and I just gave answers. I did have one answer that I thought would be cut out. I said it more because I was tired and wanted to see a couple grins in the room. I said, well, we have different, he's a good, honest man. He's really against me, but, we have different backgrounds. He was born and raised in Massachusetts, and I was born and raised in Vermont. And See, I assumed it'd be cut out.
Yeah.
It wasn't. No, but that, you know, the questions, when I'm driving the car, and whenever I've seen this thing, I said, why didn't we wash those windows? But when I'm driving the car, I thought somebody had asked a question in the back seat, and we responded to it. But these are things I've been saying all around the state. We didn't have a script. Dorothy had to figure out with the others how to cut it down to a half hour.
When you said script, the narrator script was Dave Schaefer.
Oh, that's different. Yeah.
And Dave did write that. We recorded at Earth Audio over in Heinsberg with
Hoytsburg.
oh gosh, you know who I mean, who is the head of Edinburgh, he writes all these, Bill Schubart.
Yeah.
Leaning over the console with his pants half down. Recording. And no, it was great. It was fun. His kids were upstairs. It was in his house, and that was sort of. I did another film and had Dave narrate Duxbury Town Meeting. So I got a sense of how Dave, was a good narrator. He took direction. We could get the audio recorded properly at Earth Audio and set a pathway for me for doing film. So that's when you said a narrator. That's.
Thank you.
Yeah. But keep in mind, as Dorothy mentioned this before, today, at least in putting something like that together, you got the sound, you can change the lighting in your in the camera and everything else. It is so much easier. But I can't compliment her enough. She captured what we said. Both Marcel and I were there for much of that. We knew what was said, and she captured it.
Question?
Thank you. So I have a little question and then a bigger question. The little question is the background in I think you were sitting in your state's attorney's office.
That's right.
And there was a roadway in the back. And I was trying to figure out what it was. Is that Battery Street?
It's in it's in what's now called the Costello Courthouse.
Right.
And it was the corner office. I had a view of Lake Champlain from which I had.
But that would have been Pearl Street.
That'd be Pearl Street. And
I thought Pine Street was my guess, but
Yeah.
Pearl Street. Okay, Pearl
All right,
Street.
thank you. So the bigger question is, I was really struck by the issues that you were talking about on the screen, being very much some of the things we're facing today.
Yeah.
So leaving the politicians themselves out of the equation here, were you struck by some of the same themes and issues that we're still struggling with today? How did that impact you watching this?
I am struck by it in areas of government spending. And remember, I've been chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and I kept things within the budget when I also was selective of where money is going. We talked about the military cost overruns. When I got there, I worked in a committee of senators, Republicans and Democrats, to try to get that under control, because we were talking at that time, those numbers about 20% or more of the whole defense budget in cost overruns. It was crazy. And so those issues are still there. There's a lot of issues still there. I'll tell you one, let me just digress a bit. When I was elected, the only Democrat ever been elected from Vermont's history and the others, the senior senator was Bob Stafford. And I'd known him as a kid when he was delivering newspapers to his home as lieutenant governor in Parisburg. And he took me under his wing and set aside room in his office that I could use during the transition. And helped me in every way. His wife called Marcel, urged her to come down with the kids because otherwise I'd never see it. And wrote to her, that was it. And I'll babysit your children. And we thought, well, that could destroy the relationship. Right? I didn't know what hell he was saying. But he demonstrated to me how Republicans and Democrats could get together and work on things. He considered my mentor, my closest friend, all the years that he was there in the Senate. And I would do the same thing in my years in the Senate, especially as I became more senior. And I had these beautiful rooms with a view down the mall, balconies, you could go out and look down the mall. And a lot of times we're having evening sessions around sunset time, and I invited a group of senators, Republicans and Democrats, to come and watch the sunset in between votes and have prayer hour and holy water. And somebody said, holy water? Well, I don't know if that's my religion. He said, well, he's got 12-year-old holy water, he's got single mom holy water. Well, that does fit the religion. But then you had people like Mitt Romney and others. We'd have club soda. But Republicans and Democrats talked to each other, and never a word leaked out how we're talking. But we come together and we get legislation passed. And I am so frustrated in watching what's happening in the House and the Senate. When you go into the upcoming presidency, but people have got to start coming back together, not taking positions, I'm better, you're worse.
Because I think one of the core arguments that you're making in this film is that Vermont can be a national leader because of its unique political landscape. And as a state in which our Republican governor got the most votes of any governor, right, the most sort of percentage of votes of any governor, and the Democratic senator, the most, right, popular support. So how do you think...
Kamala Harris got more even than our senator.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you think that we can move forward and continue to sort of be that national leader? What's your advice for the rest of us, I guess, on how to make Vermont the leader?
I stopped listening to single issue groups. I get so many requests over the years. Well, you got to sign this petition, or you got to agree to our 12-page whatever. And I said back, I'm happy to meet with you if you'd like. But no, I don't sign petitions. I don't sign these kind of pledges. It's single issue. And that has been very, very difficult. People need, I just give you two very quick examples that are related. When I became chairman of the Agriculture Committee, I knew that you could take trips overseas and take a government airplane to go and all that. I invited a number of the Republicans and Democrats on the Agriculture Committee, got the airplane, we flew to their states. We stayed overnight in farms. And if we were in a Republican state, even though I was chairman, I'd have him chair the committee, and vice versa. We were able to put together so much legislation, and the Organic Farm Bill, and all these other things that have been stalled because of it. And I do the same thing in overseas trips. I always had senior Republicans and Democrats come with me. Sometimes on one trip, you're sitting around the conference room with a couch and one of these military planes, and you find you start talking to each other. And you're not arguing, you're finding common ground. And that's not being done now. They're not sitting down together.
Thanks for that. Other questions? Yeah.
Dorothy, you talked a little bit about kind of the difference between the first campaign and other campaigns. And it does seem like this is a campaign strategy you kind of all caught lightning in the bottle a little bit. And I wonder if you could both talk a little more about that first campaign energy. It seems like you were the candidate, you were kind of new to this kind of filmmaking. How much of that was a need to be innovative? How much of it was dumb luck because you didn't know what you were doing? And how much of that sort of does change with successive campaigns?
Well, it was said by many others that my secret weapon was myself. And when she would come in, whether speaking French or just being herself, she's a nurse, and people were attracted to that. I was the guy who threw people in jail. It was a little different. But no, we tried all kinds of things, and we didn't have the money to do a lot of professional things and advertising and all. And so we just, fortunately, a small enough state, you just go person to person. I did 4 days before the election, 4 or 5 days before, the Vermont Herald, which at that time did the best prognosis of campaigns, had a big, tight headline. Now, this is a 4 or 5 days for election. Poll dooms play. And stood on lose by 35 points. That made for an uncomfortable weekend. I did like and you can see I kept that. And the election, the first editions, the Vermont Herald, I won. The Free Press, the first edition, had Mallory's election to the Senate closer than expected. Quickly withdrawn, the new edition came out. Leahy unexpectedly wins. Well, I think I was probably helped by the fact that a lot of people felt, well, he can't possibly win, and I got other things to do that day. I don't have to get too energized or voting. But then we had so many people that came election night. So people in my neighborhood said, or I'd heard you couldn't win, but I voted for you. I was talking to my neighbor, he said, yeah, I heard you can't win, but I voted for it. Well, my neighbor voted, but we all voted for it. And they all came down to the hotel. And Paul Broom was my campaign manager, was there. We took I probably shouldn't tell this, but we had, I think, about $300 or $400 left in our campaign account. And Paul and I said, well, just give it to the bar until it runs out, until people have a drink. Well, it ran out pretty quickly. And just then, Tony Parmett, Marcel's uncle, who was quite wealthy, comes in and Paul goes, Uncle Tony. He said, here's my credit card.
So Dorothy, do you want to respond to this as well?
I would just say that certainly curiosity fueled me. Because I didn't know much about Vermont. I certainly didn't know all these people that that we were filming, and so that sense of being able to give it that energy that curiosity brings, rather than trying to portray a dogma or a point of view or a program. So, and I think curiosity is part of an initial campaign that is often not in a re-election, because in a re-election you're faced with a lot to lose, and everybody's got their piece of the action and they want to make sure it gets put forward and blah, blah, blah. And there's constituencies who are going to be angry and donors that want this and that. So when in your, I mean, you didn't face that with Fair Title, but I've forgotten the, anyway. There's a freshness that's allowed in an initial campaign.
We had family, we had parents, we had children. They're like us.
Yeah.
And that made a huge difference. It was, yeah, I can relate to them. And it worked.
I mean, it's so funny about your father, because you actually sort of freeze when the stuff about your father comes out. I remember that at the time, when we would show the film, and we're trying to, you're always sort of trying to figure out where you sat with him. And
no, I was very, very close to my father, and he is still in my memory and dreams and all that because of it. But his honesty and his sense of history. Here's a man when my grandfather, Patrick Leahy, died when my dad was 13, died as a stonecarver, and he had to leave school to go out in Montpelier to get a job to support his younger sister and his mother. And the signs were no Irish did apply. If that was too subtle, they'd say no Catholic did apply. And he became a master printer and started their own printing business, Leahy Press, but also just read, became an amateur historian so perfectly that when our kids were in college, they had history exams. I said, let's call Grandpa Leahy and check the answers to these things. No, I think Dad and I could sit and talk easily. He was afraid that he didn't want to say anything that might hurt me. And he was my model. And but it came across that I must admit well, some of the things that came in there, we would hear it all over. We're going these last couple of weeks of the campaign. Oh, you're just like us. And well, we were. We were. Question.
Do we have time for one more question? I think we've got time for one more question.
Senator, about that other fellow you ran against wasn't born in Vermont, Bernie Sanders. What was your impression of him during that campaign? If you were, you would take votes away from him?
Well, the congressman was a good and honest man. We just had, as I pointed out, he voted for a nerve cast. Frankly, I wouldn't have. And sort of reflected when I was the deciding vote to end the war in Vietnam, and had everybody from the president, Henry Kissinger, and others calling me or meeting with me and saying, no Vermonters ever voted to end the war. It would have been critical, but this is up to the president to make that decision. I said, and the editor of the Free Press said, we'll make sure you're a one-term senator if you vote against the war. So, Dick Mallory, when he lost, I told him, my door will always be open to you. And we talked a lot after that. He got back to the legislature, and he was a good and honest man, but we did have different philosophies. And I think a lot of it was a difference in our background. And Bernie, I knew in our own polling showed that 95% of the votes he got would have gone to me if he was not there. And I said, well, why are you doing this? And he said, well, "Oh, I know I can't win, but I have to get my name known." I said, "Yeah, but you're taking votes for me." He said, "Well, you have no chance of winning either. So you get your name known, I'll get my name known." And I guess we're eventually both go down.
Dorothy was dead.
So I knew Bernie at that time because he was an independent filmmaker, and there was a group of filmmakers that were hanging out, and he had done this film on Eugene Debs, and so it was, the irony of it was that I knew him from that thing, and here he is running against Patrick in this race, and so here we are all in our 80s, doing whatever.
We're a small state.
But the whole Bernie thing is definitely a mystery.
All right. Well, I think that we're ready to wrap it up. Do you want to say something to wrap it up? Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and especially big thanks to Senator Leahy. Thanks so much for sharing with us.
One thing, if you're going to run for office, have a spouse who is far more attractive than you are.